welcome to our second series of At Home with Cathy, where we explore all kinds of uses for chalk paint by Annie Sloan. And we have quite a lineup. We're working this season, which is fun to be able to say season 2, with another book from Annie's projects called Quick and Easy Paint Transformations. It's 50 step-by-step projects to transform very common things in your home. We're not doing all 50. I've probably started with 12, but I might squeeze 14 in. Very simple projects, and we're going to go through them. I'm going to reference the page I'm using. I'm going to tell you what colors we're using and the technique. So we're going to start kind of building on what we did last season. In last season, we took 6 rooms in my house, and we did different projects in each one, from the living room, the dining room, we did a French bedroom, we did a boho bedroom, we did this room, which is our coastal room, also used as an office and now paint studio, and we also did the kitchen. So I've chosen projects to work through each of the rooms, and we're going to add things to those rooms. Well, one of the things that's always in an office is a filing cabinet. And filing cabinets mostly are fairly utilitarian and a little bit boxy and ugly. So when I was going through the project list in this book, I found one that I thought would work for in here. So we are going to do this filing cabinet as part of our coastal series, which means we use the color palette that we started with this series last year. And we're going to use a Paris gray on the outside, a cream on one drawer, and a Provence on the other. So we're going to get started. I've got my paints already. I have them all stirred, ready to go. I've washed my piece, which is the most important part, and I need to make sure I don't have any fingerprints or oils or anything, because this does get used as a surface. One of the things I really like about this paint is I don't have to take all the drawers out and sand everything. Washing is the most important part. One little thing you can see here is when we moved a year and a half ago, I taped the drawers shut, and when I pulled that tape off, it took some of this finish, because it's just a very inexpensive kind of faux wood laminate on it. And that's one of the reasons to paint it. That's kind of ugly. So we're going to start by painting the sides. I'm going to show you a picture here of what was my inspiration. This is a pastel set of drawers. Well, I don't want the pastel exactly, but I liked the idea. I liked the colors on the drawers just to show, just a little bit more interesting, and the solid on the outside, because it is a functional piece as well. So that is on page, I think it's 59 of the book that I'm using. And we're going to put that aside, because I know me and I will probably get paint on that if I don't put it away. And we're going to get started. We're going to start with Paris gray. When I'm picking colors, I've made sticks up of all of the colors, just so I have some bigger things to work with when I'm trying to decide what color works. And I played with these to get the palette that I had used originally. These are all the different colors. And this is how I came up with what I'm doing. So I'm starting with Paris gray. I've given it a good stir. And we're going to paint right in place here. And we're going to use an all-over technique. Getting it. This is melamine. It may take 2 coats, because it tends to want to do this beading. It's kind of like a plastic surface. Pull this drawer out. But you can see it really doesn't take very long to get the first coat on here. Go right up the insides there. Down the outside. When you're working with the paint, you can see how this is bubbling. That's normal on melamine. So we're going to just keep smoothing that. pick up a little bit more paint. I don't want too much paint on here because I don't want great big bubbles left where the melamine wants to make it bubble. I keep smoothing that. Working those bubbles out. And you can see as I'm going back over it, the bubbles are slowly being reduced. Every once in a while you're going to get a hair as that comes off the brush. Just pick it off. I don't want this to be perfect, but I also don't want bubbles. I'll leave that one for a minute. I'm going to go over and do the other side while that's setting up. And one of the things we're doing in this video series that's a little different is we're actually going to paint our way through each project so that you can see it start to finish in one shell. So that is going to mean a little more painting, or whatever the technique is that we're painting and distressing, whatever we might be doing. And we're going to work right through first, second coats and right into the wax. So we're just doing the exact same thing on this side as we did on the other. And I tend to paint, and I think most painters do, side to side, then the front, and finally the top. It just seems like that's the right order to do so that you're kind of correcting things as you go. Now the drawers on this are going to be painted a different color. So I'm only painting the lip around the top in the Paris Grey. So I don't need to paint the fronts of the drawers, so I'm going to do the Paris Grey right now on the top. Lots of paint on the brush here because I want to go right across and get nice strokes. But if you start in the middle of your piece and you bring your paint to the edge, you don't get that bubble of paint coming off the edge and causing either a drip or a ridge. So you just kind of tend to smooth the paint out from the center side to side. Again, I don't want it to be perfect, and because I want a little bit of texture on this. I want to make this look old, and I just have to go back here and kind of pull my paint again over those holes on the melamine. I could have sanded this melamine and given it a little bit of a tooth or some texture, but the whole point of chalk paint is not to have to do a whole lot of prep work. So let's see if this will be enough of a test. Okay. We're going to let this dry. Pull this paint just a little bit. And we're going to do the bottom drawer first. I have all these paints stirred already. So here I'm going to do the side, move around to the front, do the top. You can see I don't empty anything. Makes it so much faster if you don't have to. And this is Provence. This blue kind of echoes the blue that's on the walls in here, which I thought would be kind of a nice thing to do since I don't really have any other things with that color much in here. And it's a little bit quieter than the actual wall color. I'm going right over those rips in the melamine, or in the finish that was on here, the fake wood finish. Okay, and that's done. And we're going to grab the cream. Give a little stir and do the top. And I realize I did this in gray, so I'm going to go right over this in cream. That was an oops. and do the front. So I keep a hand just behind the drawer. There's one of those little bubbles of paint that I don't want. Keep picking it up with the brush and moving it, and I'm going against the fake green of the paneling here. The fake paneling had the green going this way. I don't want that look. I want to have it a little bit more textured, so I'm going across it, because if this is a real wood, the drawer would be going sideways, the green would be going side to side, not up and down. Just push that back a little bit so I don't paint my receipts. All right, pick up any little bubbles of paint. And I'm going to let this dry, and we're going to come back and do a second coat. So we're on to the second coat of our Paris gray on this filing cabinet, and it's kind of interesting. When you look at this, it actually sort of looks like it's already a piece of old wood that's been out in the weather, because the paint bubbled on the surface that's on here, which is sort of I think a peel and stick kind of melamine on this filing cabinet. And I kind of like the texture, but I'm going to still paint over it, and then we'll see what happens with the second coat. One thing about doing projects that you don't get to rehearse is you really don't know what the finish is going to be sometimes until you're done. So we're going to put the second coat on here. It's funny, when I did this in the kitchen, all those cabinets in the kitchen were melamine, and I thought this was what was going to happen on the sides. We had stripped off the melamine that was on the actual cabinets, the doors and the drawers, but the side melamine I couldn't really do anything with, because that was also, glued on too hard. Couldn't get it off. But it didn't do this kind of bubbling, which is where I thought it would. It's melamine, it's like a plastic. So we're going to see what happens with our second coat of Paris gray. And it may be that I have to do a third one. Or it may be that we like that effect and we leave a little bit. See that the bubbling away is starting again. Yep. On the top here and on the bottom. It's kind of interesting. It seems to be more on the tops and the bottoms than anywhere else. Maybe there's more glue there. Okay, let's turn this around. We switched to something that rotates. It makes it a little bit easier for the cameraman. Now the back of the filing cabinet, I wouldn't paint because it'll probably be against the wall. If it wasn't going to be against the wall, if I thought it was going to be out in the room as a piece of furniture, I would paint it. And it would take paint much more easily because it's not melamine. My inspector is here, my fluffy inspector, so you can't sit under that. I'm getting right up underneath there. This is another one of those projects that you really don't need to have any painting experience, and you don't need a whole lot of paint. A little bit of paint is going to go a long way, and you could transform something that's very simple and kind of boring into something that matches your decor. A lot of filing cabinets are metal, and I find metal paints very, very nicely. Okay, paint across the top here. Well, this is a little bit taller, and I am not. It gets a little bit of a challenge. We were talking during the break and thought maybe it would be a good idea to make a little, kind of like one of those mechanics benches that sliders that go under cars. We could make one out of plywood and have it so that it could go on the table, and the furniture could turn instead of me turning. And we could paint it, make it pretty. Turn it around. And I forgot to just paint down here, so just give that a quick brush. Second coat. And do the second part of the top here. And when I have the Paris gray done, I'll do a second coat of cream and Provence on the drawers, and we'll let it dry and see what that effect is, and then decide if it's going to stay that way or does it need a third coat. Because it's so quick to paint, it doesn't really matter if it did need a third coat. It's not going to take very long. I have a little bit of paint picking up off the side of my can here. I'm almost finished this can and I find it starts to dry out a little bit. Okay, let's put the Paris gray away and do the Provence. When I'm working with a couple of colors like this, and I know I'm going to be painting again within half an hour or an hour, I use a damp cloth and I just cover the brushes so that they don't start to dry out, and that will keep them at least for the time that I just need a half an hour or an hour between, rather than washing them out each time. If I was going to leave it a little bit longer, I might put them in plastic, but I still always cover them with a damp cloth. It's such a pretty color. I'm just keeping my fingers behind the drawer here so it doesn't slide closed. Some drawers are really easy to take out, and I would just set them on the edge of the table and paint around them, but I find these filing cabinet drawers, they're sort of in there for the long haul. They don't want to come out easily. There we go. And we'll do second coat of cream. And the cream is the story of how the golden retriever took the stir stick and walked all through the house with it. And we fortunately found it before it became permanent art on the floors and on the couch. So lesson learned, don't leave the golden retriever and the stir stick in the same room. close that one just a little bit so I don't do what I just did and brush cream onto the Provence. Whenever I'm painting, I always keep a damp cloth because no matter how careful you are, it seems like you're always going to have a drip or an oops sometimes. And it's just much easier to catch it before it becomes a bad word. There. All right, let's let that dry and we'll see what happens and decide if it needs a third coat, or are we just going to go with some of those little bubbles and pretend that's what we wanted on this finish. So we're ready to finish this little filing cabinet in our coastal room. We've got 2 coats of paint on it. You can see that we have a little bit of pulling away from the melamine. I kind of decided I like that. So to me, it suits this room. It certainly wouldn't suit every room because it looks a little unfinished. But in this room, I did do a driftwood bookcase. So I've got some kind of weathered looks here. And another thing we're going to do is one of the projects for this room is we're going to actually create a canvas, making it look like old wood. So I'm okay with this finish. If I were doing this on cabinets where I wanted it to be perfect, I would definitely sand this just a little bit and do another coat. I think a third coat would take care of almost all of this little pulling away. And I think part of where it's pulling away is where there is adhesive, because I notice this in other places where there's adhesive, the paint never wants to stick to the glue, which would make sense because it's kind of along the top here and more along the bottom with a little bit throughout. But I like it. It's a little bit rough. It's got a little bit of texture, and I think it's going to look like a weathered wood, which is fine for this room because it is a coastal room. But the beautiful thing about chalk paint and the finishes is they really only have to appeal to you. This is your home. You get to do whatever you like, whatever makes you happy. What makes me happy is this is no longer a little dark brown filing cabinet that sticks out like a sore thumb in this room. It's going to look like an interesting little cabinet that happens to be a filing cabinet, and it's got some color and a little bit of life. But I still need to protect it, particularly the top. So we're going to start the waxing on this, and I'll finish it and we'll show it to you at the beginning of one of our next shows. So I'm using clear wax. I'm going to put a generous amount of clear wax on. Clear wax because I don't really want to change the color. I like this gray. When you use clear wax, you can almost instantly see where you need to put more wax because it looks darker where you've applied the wax, and you can see lighter patches where you need to go back. And you do need to work the wax in, particularly when we were using our round brush and creating a little bit of texture in the paint. I've done this before, and I find especially if I wax at night, I can't always see where I didn't get the wax, and I'll go back the next day and there'll be sort of this lighter patch where I didn't work the wax in the same way. I think that having a room like this, or even just having a really good work light that you can take whenever you're working on one of your projects so that you can actually see what you're doing, makes a big difference to the success of your piece. Waxing is where everybody gets a little stuck, but I have to say it's not hard. It takes a little bit of time, it takes a good brush, makes all the difference. So we're just gonna make sure, and I can tell it's hard for you to see because you're not standing right in front of it, but I can actually see where I don't have wax. It shows up in the grain as a little bit lighter, and I just need to take wax and work it in. And with that, I mean you work back and forth. You don't just go with the grain. You're really working the wax in. So now, when I'm working on a piece like this, I'm going to do one side at a time. I'm going to use one cloth, a clean cotton. You have to use white. I've learned the hard way that if you try to use anything with color, the wax, the mineral spirits that are in the wax actually pull the pigment out of the dye out of your old t-shirt, even if you've washed it 100 times. It will pull the dye out, so you have to use white. And I'm just wiping off, and there's no pressure here. I'm not using a lot of force. I'm just wiping off the excess wax. And now I'm wiping with the grain because I do want to make sure I've got it all covered. I'm going to take a clean cloth, and this is where I start the buffing. And the buffing, don't try and do it just with your finger like this. You'll make your finger, you do that to get into the corners, but your hand will get tired very quickly. Kind of make a little wad out of the cloth and just buff. And it's the weight of my hand. I'm following the grain where I want the wax to show, and I can start to see a sheen. Again, it's always really hard to see that with the camera, but I'm getting a nice sheen here. And all this is going to do is going to protect the cabinet against spills or bumps, and this is in our painting room, so it could get paint on it from other projects. I can feel the wax. It has a little resistance when I first start to buff, but the more I buff, it starts to slide over it, and I can actually start to really see that shine. It's very nice. It's like a luster, like on pearls. And there's no more resistance. I don't have any sticky places here where I haven't cleaned the wax up. So I'm going to go ahead, finish all of this. I'm going to put 2 coats on top, just because that's where I'm likely to put something, and I may want to make it more water resistant or waterproof. So it's got a nice smooth finish. I'm kind of liking all of this little bit of speckling going on here. And you can see the shine starting to come up as I buff it. So when I'm all done and I've got the whole thing waxed, I'll take a third cloth and I'll buff the whole thing just to give it a really nice final polish, and I'll let it sit for a little bit to cure. So when you come back, we will have this cabinet all finished, and I'm trying to come up with something a little bit innovative. Instead of putting the little knobs that were here, I want something a little bit more coastal. So we'll see what I find from our hardware collection. But we do invite you to come into the store, Absolutely Fabulous at Home, talk about your chalk paint project, talk about what you'd like to transform, bring pictures, bring ideas, bring a door, whatever makes you happy. And we will help you chalk paint your home. Thank you for joining me.